Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is the first ValueCast of this year. So I'm really happy that we can once again talk about value because that's the name of the webinar. So we are going to dive once again into value creation, value realization. We're going to also look at how to create value with technology, with people, and with processes. And of course, we're going to talk about the people involved in value creation. So I'm really excited about the session today. The other reason why I'm excited about this session is because we're going to talk about the data integrity industry. And we know that data is important. And I would say that in the age of AI and digital transformation, effective data management is more than important. It's really vital for many businesses. And so we are going to talk about value creation also in the context of a real live business, which is the industry of data integrity, supported by language technology and XTM in this case. So without further ado, I would like to let my two guests today introduce themselves. And maybe let's start with Jerome. Jerome.
Thank you, Bruno. Hi, everyone. I'm Jerome Selinger. I'm a globalization manager at Precisely. I've been in the industry for now 27 years, I think. Yeah, 27. So it's been a while. And I'm currently leading the LangOps team, which is partly globalization, partly automation. So I have a bunch of engineers and project managers in my team who help develop processes and workflows to ensure that we deliver the right message to our customers around the world in different languages. So yeah, to make it short, this is me.
Okay, thanks, Jerome. And Andreas, off you go.
Yeah, thanks, Bruno, for the invite. Hi, everyone. My name is Andreas Ljungström, and I'm a Senior Manager Solutions Engineering at XTM International. That means I lead the solutions team. And I've spent close to, not as long as Jerome, but close to 20 years working at the intersection of language and technology, helping organizations optimize their localization strategies, finding the right tools to do so, and implementing the right workflows. I've been a consultant for many, many years, but at heart, I'm a translator and interpreter. But yes, I've done TMS consultancy for many years, finding solutions to automation problems and also how to drive AI in translation processes. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here today and share some insights on how language intelligence can help businesses.
Great. Thanks a lot, Andreas, as well. I forgot to mention that, of course, I'm the vice chairman of the LT Innovate Association. And this is part of a new series of ValueCast, which is called Language Intelligence at Work. And as Andreas and Jerome just said, it's really important to look at how the combination of people, processes, and technology can help or can even create value directly for any industry. But today, of course, we're going to talk about specifically about the data integrity industry. So, we have two leaders today. We have a leader in the data integrity industry, and we have a leader in the language technology industry. So that's a great combination, but that's exactly what any business should look at, and the domain and how to leverage, how to maximize language technology. And today I'm sure we'll hear more about the journey, because XTM and Precisely, and of course Jerome and Andreas have a journey together in this long way to business improvement, operational excellence. So it's not something that can be achieved in one day. So it's a great journey, and of course there are a number of lessons learned, a number of achievements that have been made, a number of challenges. I know Jerome cannot be stopped when he talk about how to improve product management. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk today about. Yeah, let's get started with your presentation, and setting the stage, and tell us more about your journey and how you work together, and of course, Jerome, how you managed to achieve everything that you achieved in your company, which is quite impressive, I have to say. So yeah, let's go ahead.
So maybe we can start with the slides if that help drive the discussion. But altogether, I think, Bruno, you summarized it pretty well. Without the technology, we wouldn't be able to achieve what we're doing now, because the concept of localization is very much rooted in the 1990s, and we're way past this. So we're not only doing this. Localization is part of what we do, obviously, and it will remain part of it. But at the rate that technology is evolving, the journey has been great already, but yeah, this is just the start of it, I think, with everything that's happening now around AI, LLMs, and all the technology that we're seeing, all the connectivity we can get out of the box with all of these great tools we're using. This is really just the start of it. But maybe to illustrate my thoughts, I can just share this initial slide that I have built, showcasing where we started and where we are. So the old workflow on the left-hand side, it represents the way we've done things prior to XTM. Before XTM, we used to have a translation management system, which was not as good as this one and complete. So what we had to do was manually grab localizable files from Git repositories and many others, or even sometimes getting files by email, by Teams or whatever, and then start to prepare the files, get back to engineering about questions. And we did all of this in tools, separate tools, standalone tools, SDL Pasolo, to name it. And it's a great tool, but it takes some time to prepare the files, especially for very complex projects. And this is, I think, a view that represents a mid-sized to large-size project with different repositories, multiple file types, and also multilingual, obviously. So the time to pull the files from engineering, making sure that we pull the right ones, that we have the new ones, etc., and getting them to a stage where we're happy with the preparation of the files, applying whatever translations we had in the past, leveraging from all the projects, and then send things to translation. That was already a good 5 days of work, a good week of work. Then the translation took some time. Obviously, we had a lot of questions from translators. And then we got the files back. We had to run QA on this, making sure that everything was aligned, and then generate target files that we had to redeliver back to engineering. So all the red rectangles here, they show manual work on our side, and the blue ones represent the engineering side of things. So altogether, after delivery, teams had to do some QA, report back some bugs to us, and then they had to deploy everything into the build. So all of that altogether was a good 30 days of work. But this is this generic example of what a product looked like at the time, a project. And now with the implementation of XTM, what we've been able to do is an end-to-end journey for the translatable files. So the automated pulling of the files takes place directly in Git repositories. This is something we set up. And we've worked with DevOps, our DevOps team, to integrate this Git pipeline directly in Git. So it's something that engineers can consume out of the box thanks to the DevOps. And obviously files they go directly to XTM and where they're parsed. And also we're using more standard formats now, JSON, regex, things that you can translate without heavy preparation. So all of this goes then to XTM, where they're parsed, where the quote is made, and the workflow starts with our translation vendors. So altogether, the first part, which was pulling the files, identifying the files, making sure we were not making any mistakes, and preparing the files, got back from 5 days to about an hour. This is more or less what it takes. It can be less even. Then the translation, generation, and delivery takes a little less time because there's less things to do. And then QA is quicker. Usually we have less bugs returned to us by engineering, and deployment happens faster too. So we cut down almost by half the amount of time necessary to process such a typical project.
I think that's an amazing journey. There are multiple things that we can take this apart and look at it from different angles, but I think it's important to highlight that in order for Precisely to scale, they had to switch, right? They had to augment their tech stack with something that would be able, so that they would be able to process more content. Certain desktop solutions just won't cope with the sheer weight of the localization files, for instance. Well, and here we see the preparation step just taking an hour. That's something that you can get from a SaaS solution where you don't have a big fat client, as they say, limiting your performance on your desktop PC or Mac. So that's an important part of the puzzle. But what Jerome also alluded to here, which I think is really clever, is thinking about the upstream, right? How do the files even enter the localization ecosystem, right? Setting that pipeline up in Git and working with native formats, which lend themselves well to translation, actually. That's a big part of solving the puzzle as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There was some heavy engineering work behind the scene happening with both my engineers and the developers, to be honest, because there were some old file types that we had to get rid of. DLLs, for instance, were part of some of our deliverables, and this is not possible to process without these local tools that you just mentioned, and we had to live with this. And it made sense. It's a legacy product, so it's using legacy procedures. So not everything can be moved to this model, but for the most part, yes. And my company has purchased other companies across the years, and their products were not localized. So how we managed to get them into the right-hand side of the business, of the workflow, was just telling them to use standard file types. I think this is essential, because if you start having legacy products with legacy file types, with specific custom parsers for each of them, the difficulty is to get everything aligned in that case, and it takes a lot more time to put things together into a workable workflow, or else you'll just have to pre-process, post-process, and this is not something I really think is valuable, because you're just adding error-prone steps in the process.
Just to confirm, and of course it's great because we already talk about value here. We talk about cost and time effectiveness, which is value per se. I just wanted to confirm what I put in the chat, by the way, before we continue, Jerome and Andreas, that for the audience, please don't hesitate to put your questions or your comments in the chat, because we will have a Q&A section of this webinar. So if you can, make sure that your questions are in the chat before we get to the Q&A session. So during the presentation from Andreas and Jerome, please do that. It's going to be very helpful so that we can immediately jump to your feedback and jump to your questions specifically. So thanks again for using the chat for these questions and comments. So sorry, Jerome and Andreas, please go ahead.
No, not a problem. So yeah, there's one thing you mentioned. I think it's SaaS, Andreas, and I think that really is the core of the solution here. Going SaaS is absolutely what you need to do to get to this new workflow, or else it's just impossible. And as technology evolves, you can see the number of connectivity that you can get between all of these tools. I'm talking translation management systems, content management systems, and many others. Many others. See the number of different APIs that we can leverage from one platform to another. And this is expanding as we go. So yeah, the more we see things evolve, the more we can think of different integrations. And all in all, what we're trying to do is to build an end-to-end solution where everything starts and ends at the same point, and with automation in between, because there will always be some automation that needs to happen to pass the place between one system to another. But with APIs now and with AWS, I'll mention it in another slide, this is becoming more and more easy. It's getting easier and easier, but more and more complex as we have many options on the table now.
That's true. In a SaaS solution, one thing that becomes simpler is the dissemination also of tasks and workflow steps. You can automate all of that. Whereas on the left-hand side, which partially at least relies on desktop solutions, you have a chain of, let's call them squirrels, that really have to make sure that files are passed from place to place, etc., and that people have on their local PCs or whatever, on their local machines, let's say, that they have the right equipment, that they can handle the files that they receive from the client, that they receive from Precisely. It becomes very hard to scale, and there are lots of breaking points as well, where the process can break, leading to frustration also on all sides, really, right? Because the localization stream just stops at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way to scale up to more products and more automation is through technology, because on the left-hand side of the workflow, this is something that has worked for the past 10 years. Absolutely worked really well. And my team has been working on this model for many years. But if you start scaling up the number of products or languages you want to support, there's no way you can do this without the addition of more people to your team, which always comes with difficulties when it comes to explain to management why you need another PM to handle this project. They don't see the value easily. While getting on the more technology side of things is something, it's a message that gets through a lot easier than just getting more humans to work on it. Well, at least that's how my company sees things, because we're very much technology driven. We're a technology company. So we have this engineering mindset all across the chain up to the CEO. So this is a message that resonates with them. When you start telling you need more people to do this, they will start telling, but what kind of technology can you implement to do the same thing or more with the same amount of people? So yeah, that really is the core, and SaaS is absolutely a mandate, because you're just cutting down the passing of files to a minimum, and no errors passing the plates. I've seen this too often in the past.
It's a couple of years back now, but I did a survey with project managers in a large LSP, within a large LSP, so there were several hundred project managers all in all there. But we checked how much time they saved in XTM Cloud in terms of sourcing. So getting a project up and running and sourcing it with a vendor. And in the old days, it took them around 15 minutes to create a project and to source it with a vendor. And with XTM Cloud, they got it down to 2 to 3 minutes. Now that's an amazing time save, right? And we're talking about clients that would send 50 to 100 projects every day. So the amount of time they saved within that project management team was just massive. And all thanks to what we see here on the right-hand side, basically automation potential and just, clever workflow orchestration.
Yeah, and also, well, having a platform easy to use as XTM also helps us expand further how we interact with the people internally in the company. In the old days, only us in the old TMS were able to use the TMS because it was very specific, very complex, old looking, and scary, to be honest. It was a scary product to log into. But now what we do is, for some products where I would say my team has little value processing the files, And I'm thinking, for instance, marketers or the web team, they have XLIF to translate, they have a Word file. The legal team may have an XLIF to translate to put back on the website. We just create project templates to them. We assign them a workflow and we train them how to create a project in XTM. And by using the project templates, they just click on it and everything is preset and they just click the go button and everything goes back to the vendor. So it also helps us expand further how we can help internally, how we can serve the company internally. So we have internal customers in a self-service mode using XTM.
That's really nice. And can you tell us, Jerome, how that was implemented? Was it like from one day to the next? You said like all apartments, green light, let's go. Or was it sort of like a trickle effect where you got people to jump on board one after the other?
Well, actually, the way we implement this is quite simple. When we got a new internal requester, we treat him as a client in a way, and we see what kind of service they need. And in most cases, they're super happy to get and do things themselves without having to rely on us. The reason is many of internal stakeholders are based in the US, and my team is spread across Canada to Japan with Poland and me in the middle. So we're not always there to help them. So they're always happy to help themselves in the system. So what we do is, if we think the person is okay enough with technology, we just treat their first project hand to hand with them and show them around. And we just make sure that everything is working smoothly. And then we gradually let them do things themselves. And as we expand the reach internally, well, I cannot expand my team to help these people. So I need to rely on the technology that helps me do this. And XTM is the way to go, because when you set up an account for a simple, not a power user like ourselves, a simple user, you can restrict the person's view to only their projects and only their workflows, their TMs, etc. So that's one way of simplifying as much as we can everything.
Yeah, and that's I would say we have several clients that work that way, and actually spread out across different verticals. So this can be within the software realm also, but also in like retail and manufacturing. We have clients that rely on a model, self-service model, let's say, where they allow the end requesters to place a request with the localization team, either in XTM Cloud directly or via a portal. That's also a solution that is quite popular, but making it simple for the end requester to still get value from the localization team in an easy way. That's really the gist of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I recall the portal, and this is.
Just going to say,
sorry, go ahead.
It's sort of like a win-win, because obviously the localization team wins as well, because they get everything in a formalized manner, no stray assignments, nothing funky. Let's say if you want to restrict if you want to prevent the usage of PDFs, you can, like things like that, right? Easy to implement if you want to sort of like outsource that with your end requesters to make them go via a portal instead.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and the portal is an option that we were presented with, but we elected other options other than the portal, because we thought at the time that our internal stakeholders are technical enough to use XTM. But I remember that the portal, it's even easier than what we do. You just drag and drop after logging in, and that's all you need to worry about, and everything gets magically back to you.
So then I have a question, Jerome. What we see on the right-hand side, if we take sort of like your first software product that you wanted to launch in the new process, how long did it take you to implement that for, let's say, one product?
That depends obviously of the complexity of what you want to get through the system, because we we obviously have an alpha version of the Git connector. Each time we ramp up to a new product, we make some changes, we tweak it. There's always something we have to discover. That always happens. Now we're getting better and better at it, so we no longer have the problem. But if you have proper findings proper file extensions with the standards organized in a clear way. So in a way, if engineering has done their work by creating something well organized and well done using standards, this is absolutely essential. Testing and implement and checking the connector, making sure that everything works okay, could take anything between a week or two, maybe 3 if there's some difficulties we need to figure out. But I would say that for the first iteration of a new product, if we were to purchase another company next month, and if I had to do this, I would say I will not be automating everything for the first iteration, just for the sake of ensuring that everything falls back into place. So in that case, I would assign someone from my team, a very experienced person, looking into the code, looking into how everything is organized, and make the first iteration as a standard, not a CDCI development model, but as a standard project. And just aligning our ducks, making sure that we got our ducks in a row and everything works okay. But if everything goes well, I would say month and a half.
Very interesting. And yeah, the process of launching, more complex workflows has become increasingly simple in the last couple of years, right? APIs have evolved. There are sort of like low code to no code approaches nowadays where you can integrate tools with basically, UI drag and drop actions, more or less. And that has influenced how we look at connectivity solutions today. So yeah, I imagine that when you got started with XTM a couple of years ago, it's 4 or 5 years back now, integrating was actually more of a challenge than it is today, 2025.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The list of API, well, the different connectors that XTM supports. Well, I think this was also one of the drivers why we chose XTM, because there was this connectivity we could get that we couldn't without our previous provider. If memory serves, at the time we asked them how much it would cost to integrate MT in the transaction management system, and I think it was close to $60,000 in professional services just to connect us to Google MT, which was not possible. This is not something you can internally validate with your internal stakeholders. There's no added value here. It's way too much money for the return on investment. So this is why we just decided to move to a platform that allows us to do this out of the box, because it was already built in. You just need to enable it. That's all. And that's the biggest differentiator, I think.
Yeah, so I can expand on that just a little bit. We have XTM is sort of, or not sort of, we're completely vendor agnostic. That means you can use any MT, you can use any LSP, or freelancers or internal resources. So it's really up to you as a user of the system to decide what your localization program is going to look like and which components it consumes and uses. So if you want to use Google, that's fine. If you want to go with one of our partners like Systran or Intento, you can do that as well, or AWS or Amazon Translator. All of these MT players can be brought into your ecosystem at no extra charge. So if you spend your tokens with Google, you get a bill from Google. That's basically how it works. But the system itself is a pure tech ecosystem, so you can plug anything into it.
And Jerome, this is a great slide, by the way, because you can see the value that is created with the implementation of a new workflow. But I also know that this new workflow was, for you in your company, it was translated into value for product management And I know that in the audience today, we have a number of people who are from the language services side, but also from the product management or content management side. And I know you have a slide also, summarizing the journey also from a product management perspective. So yeah, that's another way to look at value creation, value realization. Sorry. So I'll let you comment on that, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what the journey started really more or less in 2019 when my company was acquired by my current company. And this is when the whole team was brought over with our translation management system at the time. And this is when we started looking into another one. So it all started in 2019, and we had a base budget, and that's the first two lines, to support localization needs. So translation with our vendors mostly. So the first 2 years was a little of a struggle because of the merger. We had a major reorganization in the team. We also had the COVID years in 2020. So all of that, we had some budget restraints at the time, around 15% a year. So we had to decrease what we could support at the time. And then 2021, we started implementing XTM. So XTM alone with the way internal matches are calculated helped us save about 7% altogether on documentation and user interface. All combined, we saved 7%. On a company my size, this is a significant amount of money, really, it is. And we then could implement Google MT because there was a push from management to get MT in production because we were spending a significant amount of money. So there was a push to make some savings. And I've always drawn a line in the sand where quality doesn't have to suffer from budget cuts. So this is why we started with Google MT and then do some post-editing. And we didn't lower the quality level. That's the first thing. But we also managed to get a 20% cut from the previous process, plus the integration of XTM. Altogether, we spent about 20% less than we expected that year, just because of the technology that we implemented. Then in 2022, we started looking into how we can push this further. And that was the start of an internal request to look into machine translation ourselves. So what we did was use, free solutions, and there are open source solutions to implement MT on our side. The only constraint was to have enough material to train your MT engine. And we had, if I say 100 million words in our TMs, I think it's even more than that, into 25 languages. So we had a lot of data to train the engine with. And when we started doing this ourselves, we got blue scores like 72%. So it was like massively important. And we no longer had to use MT from Google, we're using our own. And then we also connected to Git, which helped us save some time. So it's not really money we're saving here, but really a lot of time. So all of that brings us to 23, when we have this huge outburst of AI and LLMs available everywhere, right, for free to test. And then we started looking at, okay, we do MT and our translation agencies do post-editing. How can we improve the quality of MT with an LLM? Because you can see how well it works. And we implemented automatic quality evaluation. So all the segments that are good enough to be pushed to production as they are, go to production, and everything which is below a certain threshold goes to post-editing. So we reduce the number of segments that go to post-editing, and that's a 25% decrease on documentation. I'm talking documentation alone. We don't do UI translation with machine translation. And altogether, if you see the numbers from 2020 to 24, we reduced the budget by 45%, more or less. And if you look at the bottom, that's the cherry on top of the cake. We started with 5 products. We now support 14 products. So we spend half of what we spent 5 years ago, and we support 3 times as many products as we did with the same team.
That's amazing. I think there's no other word for it. I mean, to be able to do more with less, it's sort of like a dream, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this was definitely a push for management to see what we can do with how can we scale up with no extra budget, and even more, a reducing budget year after year. Because to be honest, the budget we had in 2020, in 2019 was huge. We were talking a lot of money, and it was way too much, to be honest. It wouldn't be a problem for a company the size of Microsoft, but for us, we're 2,000 something plus people. It was massive, and now we're really at something very decent. And I don't get any pushbacks from management when I'm submitting my budget to them. And that's a relief, to be honest. This is always a fight.
Yeah, because you have a proven track record. So they know
Mhm.
that there's value in the localization department, that you are pushing out more products that are localized. So it's definitely simpler for them to go to market this way and
Mhm.
faster.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also because the way the budget is approached in my company, it's one budget line for globalization that I manage, instead of before, where we had a model where translation was a part of cost of goods, as they call it. So every product manager had to handle their own budget for localization. So by combining everything into one big budget, it looks much bigger and much more impressive, to be honest. So yeah, it's also a perception of the value that you bring. But if you're able to compare what you're spending on translation versus the return on investment for some products, well, it's a no-brainer. It's 1 to 100, more or less. If you're spending $1, you're getting 100 of international value out of it.
Yeah. And the time is money, obviously, right? You mentioned that the Git connectivity was an important piece of the puzzle in saving time, but that of course translates into euros and dollars also. This
Mhm.
type of journey is not untypical, let's say, of our clients. So we see this type of return on investment in many verticals, oh, well, all across the board, really. This can be life sciences, manufacturing, retail, what have you, software, obviously, also. And without mentioning names, I've seen this, for instance, a manufacturing customer of ours. They had 6 localization managers when they left the previous TMS. They actually scaled down to 5 PMs eventually in XTM, but the output was several millions words more each year, right? So with the actually a slightly reduced team, they were actually to output more words every year with XTM by simply moving to XTM Cloud.
Mhm. Yeah, and one thing about Git connectivity is 2022 was a turning point for us as well, because we started modernizing our portfolio of products. The company is a very old company. I think we started in 1970 something with mainframe IBM products, so software that supported these models. And we have a little legacy of these products still, and data lake mining products and data quality products, which were very, very standalone. And 2022 was a turning point for us because the company started to move fully to a SaaS version, a SaaS strategy. So we're moving all our products into a SaaS model where we can deploy the products, the builds, we can deploy them twice a week if we want to. If we want to implement bug fixes, it's SaaS, fully SaaS. So customers don't even see the difference when something is getting pushed. Everything works continuously. So how do you accommodate translation in that context? Well, you have to do your CDCI research and see how you can do translation without without stopping the whole thing for 2 months just to get the files translated. So you absolutely need to do your research about this and how you can help. So this is why we started looking very closely into the Git connectivity.
Yeah,
And
and I
Git
think
is central in that extent.
And what we see here, and as you mentioned, the upper management knows the worth of the localization program with the reduced budget and increased output year on year. And I think this is, testament also to a new mindset, I hope, in more modern management, let's say, that localization is no longer viewed as some type of necessary evil, but actually something that creates value for the enterprise as such, right? We know by now, and I think most CEOs know this, that consumers want to buy in their local language, right? It's been proven time and again that, like, I think 3 out of 4 people would prefer a product that is documented in their own language, or where the website is in their own language, etc. So it's just, as you said, Jerome, a no to want to localize, because it's going to increase so much. It's going to boost your engagement. It's going to increase conversion. It'll create more brand loyalty. It has multiple beneficial spin-off effects.
Yeah, and there's also another factor to take into account is the type of products you want to localize. It's heavily linked to the type of consumers you have. The more technical, the less translation you need, because people are used to use English all the time. And the contrary, the less technical, the more localization you need. And the products, our flagship is a data integrity suite, which helps drive the whole pipeline of data quality. And it's not meant for data scientists. It's meant for users, maybe power users. So they do need localization. There's no question asked around it. And we had to accommodate to this in a CDCI fashion. So that also explains why we had this push to find a solution to enable continuous delivery, continuous localization.
And Jerome, I know when we prepared this session for today, I know that we talked a lot about your ecosystem. An ecosystem in this case means, of course, the people, the processes, and the tech stack. So I know that you wanted to dive into that as well. Yeah, that's the big picture, I would say. Yeah.
Yep. So the color code is everything that's purple on the left-hand side on the bottom. This is the human factor. So it's us, the LangOps team, we're heavy users of XTM. We have the self-service users that I mentioned, the web team, the marketing team, they're just using XTM directly. And all of us, we work with XTM, and we still have a little additional third-party tools locally. We use some QA tools locally. We still have a solo in the loop for legacy products because it's a good match. So we cannot change this. And we still can communicate with XTM. That requires a little effort sometimes, but this is a necessary evil. We need to do it anyway. We need to support the products no matter what. And we cannot bring to the right-hand side workflow. There's technically no way of, it would mean recreate the whole product, and this is not feasible. But altogether, if you see here, XTM is really the cornerstone of our tech stack because we plug everything into here. The most important one, obviously, is AWS, because this is our growing tech stack. This is where we're building microservices. The first thing we built there is a vector database that pulls and ingests automatically content from our help center, available web help center on the website, and also our knowledge base and customer cases in Salesforce. So everything gets pulled here. So we have this huge amount of information, and we use it for many, many cases. One of the cases I haven't listed here is a chatbot that we built with an LLM and GenAI to create a chatbot for support engineers. So support engineers, when they get a request from customers, they can ask the chatbot for existing cases and for solutions. So this is helping them getting answers a lot quicker than they had to do before. They had to do some research themselves, and for junior ones, it would take a longer time because everything is there in the database. All the documentation is there. So the LLM just reads and understands and suggests an answer. So that's one of the things we're doing with the database, but we have many, many more in mind. Right now, what we also support is MT. We are not using AWS MT. We host our MT solution in AWS. That's a different thing. We have automated translation, automated QA evaluation, and other connectors. There's other connectors that we want to take a look into. There's a Git connector in AWS. We want to take a look into it. Salesforce is there, Figma, there's multiple there that we can tap into. Everything goes back to AWS and to XTM because we still rely on XTM heavily for parsing the files, quoting, and doing all the workflow management. And that is not something we really want to do ourselves. It's way too much to develop ourselves. So XTM is the perfect central place for this. What we also have is the APIs that also exist within the XTM cloud interface. So we have Figma, Git, and our CCMS is connected to it. Figma is a work in process. This is something I like to test under production. As soon as our UX team are done with their prototypes in Figma, we want to be able to pull these into XTM, translate them using human translators because we want to ensure quality. And in the meantime, engineers, the UI engineers, will be developing the UI, and then engineers will be creating the corresponding resource files, the JSONs, the regex, you name it. By the time they put this to the Git repository, translation will be done. So when they push files to Git, automatically we get the files from Git, they go to XTM, and they get translated automatically with what we translated from the Figma designs. And that can go back automatically. So by doing this, you're doing CDCI without machine translation, with human translators for user interface. I think this is essential.
Yeah, it's basically a clever recycling, you know, which is at the core of any TMS, I would argue. But the cool thing about this approach that we see here on the slide is the centralization aspect. Having XTM do all the heavy lifting in terms of parsing and analysis and matching and pre-translation. The fun thing is that the more you put into it, the better it gets, actually, because it scales very nicely in terms of hardware, but also just in the benefits that you get from a centralized TMS, they actually just grow more and more over time this way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm happy to see this on the slide. I think you were almost underselling your KV vector database, Jerome, when we were talking about this earlier. You mentioned you even had, well, it's internal facing because it's sort of like your own internal gold mine, let's say, solution, but also with automated retraining, etc. I believe you've also implemented, right?
Yes, this is something we're working on, automatically retraining the engine when the job completes in XTM. You can implement an API method that triggers the regeneration of the retraining of the engine in AWS. So yeah, and talking about the gold mine, we have some ideas in the pipeline. What we want to do also with the vector database is try and see if we can do LLM, translation of user interface, which will leverage what we have in the vector database to ensure that this is correct. And many other things. The vector database, we want to use it for many other things. And altogether, we have prototypes in mind also to help the documentation team. We will try to implement a readability score and suggested improvements from the vector database. It will give some hints about how do you make your sentence more readable, because yeah, the better your quality is in source, the better your translation and the easier it gets. We're also working on terminology management because this is, I wouldn't call it a low-hanging fruit because it would be a very heavy low-hanging fruit. And we don't have an internal terminologist. We don't. And terminology takes a huge amount of time. So what we're trying to do is to generate terms, list of terms automatically, populate the terms with a definition using the vector database because everything is there, so that our UX people can digest something and not start from scratch. They would work on it, refine it, and pass it back to us. We'll implement it in XTM, in the term base, and then we will try to implement it on our technical writer perspective in Oxygen. We're looking into how do we implement a glossary there. And yeah, so it's all together. This is doing language operations from a cross-functional level. And we're able to do this because we have this database, we have AWS, we have XTM, which help us pass the plates between all of these different silos. Because this is the problem in many companies, everything is siloed, and having a tool like XTM helps us build the tools to break the silos and work, well, with different teams that are not supposed to be working with you directly. So it simplifies things.
And it helps to get buy-in from other stakeholders in your company. If you say like, hey, we've been working on this resource, the term base, let's say, we've been working on this resource and we're now trying to automate certain things so that you can also use it in your development studio, let's say. I mean, that creates synergy effects for your fellow colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some other cool aspects to this slide. The CCMS that we see here in deep purple, is, as we know, is well, you mentioned Oxygen, but it's a DITA-enabled CCMS.
Yes.
Which also from a synergy perspective and a recycling perspective is key to good workflow automation in the TMS, and also leads to a lot of good side effects for linguists, subject matter experts, your LSPs that work online. So with DITA, you can do all kinds of cool things. You can take the DITA maps and make sure that the individual topics are rendered in the right reading order. You can enable things like visual context, so translators, LSPs, subject matter experts, anyone going into the online workbench can get a contextualized view of the content they're working on. And of course, in the DITA principles, it's basically inherent that you are, trying to recycle phrases all the time and across topics, so you're less redundant, possibly less creative, let's say, in your authoring, but in the interest of saving energy and also saving translation cost, it's a much more, well, let's say it's more robust approach to localization and to authoring. And has, as I mentioned, so many effects downstream and reduces the localization effort enormously.
Yeah, and that just rings a bell. We had our QBR with one of our translation vendors, and they presented us with KPIs and metrics. And our account manager mentioned that our reuse rate is 92% year on year. We're reusing 92% from last year's content. So every year we just bring another 8% of new content. That's all. Everything else is perfectly leveraged, and we're not paying anything more than we should do. And apparently this is one of the top she's ever seen among her portfolio of customers. So yeah, we're able to do this because of the technology, obviously. Without it, this is the thing. When we moved to this company, when we presented them with the tool stack we were using and the tool stack we wanted to have, they started pulling back by going, oh, whoa, that's way too much money. And the way you have to fight this back is to show how much the company would have to spend without having one. And when you start explaining that vendors don't have any specific interest in keeping the TM up to date for you and keeping the codes clear for you, and you show how much you would pay without having a TMS, then the TMS pays for itself 10 times every year.
Yeah, and you're not alone there either, Jerome. There are a lot of clients that say this. We also try to make it visual for clients and for managers, so we can provide things like BI dashboards where you see sort of like a graphical return on investment, things like that. We implemented in the last couple of years just to make it even more appealing to people to understand the value of a TMS and all its components and connectors. So yeah, just showing the return on investment is an important part. If you're not able to explain it as well as Jerome is, then having something like that can also help to sort of get the buy-in from your enterprise stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, this is, I think, essential what you just mentioned, because we're globalization, localization, language experts. So we know what a fuzzy match is. We know what leverage means. We know all of these things. But how do you convey the value of this tool to another stakeholder up in the chain, your CEO, your CFO? How do you explain the value? Well, the only common language we have in this case is the savings or the money you will have to spend if you go with one route or another. So I think that's the key message here is whenever you want to scale up your tech stack, you have to show how much you would get out of it, or how much you would lose if you fail to implement it, if you fail to have it. And I think that's a message that gets through easily with stakeholders that don't understand anything about localization, and most of them don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great overview. It's a great big picture, Jerome, that you put together here, because I think it will resonate with many people, even though many people will not have the same picture as you have in Precisely. They might be struggling with getting there, but I think that this is really where you can be really creating more value than expected sometimes when you are, taking this, I'm going to quote you, this cross-functional approach. And I think it's really from a technical perspective, but also from a human perspective, going cross-functional is really probably, in my opinion, maybe other people have other views on that, but in my opinion, it's one of the greatest value creators, going beyond your team and working with other people. This is where you can, maximize the value that you can create. So that's just a comment. And we do have questions in the chat. So the first one is from Esther. First of all, she says, Jerome, that your experience is impressive. So good for you. And is it possible for you to talk a bit more about your team, the size of your team, the roles of your team? And I would add to that question, how your team works on a daily basis with other roles in the product supply chain, because I really like your approach of being cross-functional. But I think it's not always without issues. There might be frictions, there might be a conflict sometimes, because you said yourself you are the expert, but some people might not recognize you as the expert. So can you tell a bit more about your team and not just the size and roles, but also how they operate from a human perspective, not just managing projects, but also collaborating?
Okay, yeah. About the team, I can see that some of them are online right now, and all of this, everything that I've shared with you, none of this would have been possible without them. And I can see Gosha, Martin, Marta are online. So it's back to you guys about the incredible work that you're doing for this team. So yeah, the team is 8 people, not including me. I have 3 engineers, automation engineers. So they work with everything that has to do with automation and technology altogether. I also have a content manager, and she's overseeing things from a very high level perspective and managing cross-functional projects like terminology. And also have 4 release managers. This is how we name them after looking at what we do. And the way I see things is LangOps is the DevOps of localization. So I align their titles to release managers. Globalization release managers is what they are because this is what they're helping pave the way for success for localization of the products. So we interact on a daily basis with product management, with engineering, with documentation teams. UX doesn't happen as often, but we interact with them by reviewing their designs, making sure that there's no blocker. And we also sometimes, well, I work more with sales, with other stakeholders in the company, our CTO, for instance, we work on technology together. So the essence of what I think our team should be is not be a niche team somewhere hidden in the hierarchy, regardless of where you are, how many bosses you have on top of you, how many levels of management. You have to speak up, you have to show yourself, you have to demonstrate, you have to showcase. And the slides I shared with you earlier today, I shared them last year with my CEO, with our CEO, and he was super pleased to know about everything we do. So yeah, we work as cross-functionally as we can. This is absolutely essential in what we do. It's daily. It's absolutely a daily initiative.
Yeah,
We'll follow
that's
up on
great.
that,
That's
Jerome, if I may.
oh yeah, sorry, Andres.
So, how did the functions of the team evolve as you got started with XTM? Because you then automated much more, I suppose PMs or the old PM role, right? When they were shuffling files back and forth, preparing things. How did the team evolve in the last couple of years in this regard?
I would say in the past, not past couple of years, but if I compare what we do now to what we did 5 years ago, 5 years ago, I would say we were good file pushers in a way. We were pushing files back and forth, fixing files, helping with many things. But really, if I compare to what we do now, is to add value to the whole chain and do more than this. Doesn't mean more work, it means do things differently. And with automation, you can do more things. Some of my PMs, they attend calls with product management when they talk about the future, about the product, how much sales we make. So we're able to do other things which have much better added value than only doing project management. Because if you think of it, project management is externalizable. What we do now is not.
Great point. I think that also is going to resonate a lot with some people because it's part of the challenges you mentioned. That if you can be externalized or if you can be sort of you can be managed differently. But you're right. You have to demonstrate your value every day, and that's the best way to keep going. I would say probably. We have other questions. So the next question is from Roberto, and it's probably for the both of you. So Roberto is asking, or is referring first to the point you made about quality evaluation. So you said that, Jerome, I think it's you, you said that you only send the content that scores below a specific threshold for post-editing. So his question is, do you mean practically, concretely, do you mean that you, post-edit only segments or fragments, or are you sending full documents for, for post-editing if those documents are below your threshold?
No, what we do, I won't deep dive too much because we won't have the time, but what we do is we get the job in XTM, we apply the TM, so we get the ICE matches, the 100% matches, and everything else, including the fuzzies, we want to send them to MT for retranslation. And then the LLM kicks in and identifies in AWS what's good enough to go to production or not good enough. So only what needs to be reviewed gets back into XTM with the status of low fuzzy match. So in that case, it gets a full review.
Okay.
I can just add to that what Precisely are doing is one way of doing quality prediction or quality evaluation. There are many approaches to it by now, and with the surge of LLMs now, We see new methods being developed almost weekly, or new approaches. But yes, there's the outside approach where you implement it yourself. You can also implement this in XTM Cloud if you like, and you can use your own LLM, right? So it's it's a big playing field right now, quality evaluation, and there are also some dedicated providers that do precisely this, right? Sorry for the word pun there, but there are some players on the market that do quality prediction as a service to TMS providers or users of TMSs. So you can sort of target those companies also if you're interested in that as a managed service.
Mhm. Great. All right. Next question from Chantal. She's asking how your rate of high reuse rate is calculated. So probably Jerome, this is first for you, but Andreas, I'm sure you will have a comment on that. So she wants to know, actually, does it include DITA, CCMS content reuse, or only TM reuse? I think it's a great question because I was also impressed by the high reuse rate that you mentioned. And it's actually good to know what's in there. How you manage to have this, to get this high reuse rate.
How do we get this into a simple formed answer?
Yeah, I knew it was going to be difficult.
Yeah, so how do we get into such a high leverage rate? Well, I think the first thing is we educate people who create content and tell them to be as consistent as they can be. And if they don't have to change a comma here and not there, then don't do it. Be as consistent as you can, be as clear as you can, and don't touch what you've done last year, even if you're happy with changing and to a comma, for instance. And this is really what helps generating such high leverage rates, because if they switch things from another year on year, then you're just going to end up having fuzzy matches all the time. So yeah, that's how we manage it, I think. And yeah, because DITA 2, you can send whole, I'm not a DITA 2 user per se, so I wouldn't be an expert in that field. But when you send data files to XTM, they send the maps. So the maps come with all the files associated to it, and this gets into the TM, and usually only the files that were touched are usable, well, are editable in the workbench. So we don't touch anything else. Unless we see legacy issues, obviously, then our vendors are proactive to this. So if they see problems, they just tell us.
There's this big debate whether you should send Delta or whether entire submission, right? From when you're doing authoring and you have a revised version of your source document or source documentation, should you just ship the entire thing or should you just ship the Delta to the TMS? I'm not saying that there's like there's probably a two-sided answer to this, but like normally, and this is the linguist in me also, I prefer to have the full thing just for context, right? And I prefer then to lock the stuff that I don't need to touch, but at least I have the full context. And just to hammer in the fact that XTM is really good at handling large pieces of content, we have clients in the life science realm that will send data packages that are like between 10 and 20 million words. It's massive, and there are few systems that can even handle that. But the cool thing about it, when you open it up, it's still fast because we will chunk it. So similar to your LinkedIn feed, right? You can scroll, and you will just get more content as you scroll. That's basically how we do it as well. So we can parse even huge amounts of content, and yeah, especially DITA lends itself really well to this type of process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I encourage documentation teams mostly to send everything because they're always worried about, oh, but I didn't touch this, I touched this. And I always go, no, don't worry. Don't worry, the system will figure it out. You don't need to worry about this. We do this internally. The source control is happening internally. versus the previous version of the docs. So if you're not changing anything, we will not change anything. And we don't have 10 to 20 million words documents, well, projects, Andreas. I think the biggest is around 3 to 4 million, but yeah, we got it recently to XTM and we ended up with a quote of $34. That was the delta. Just $34 for 3 million words total, considering the target languages. So I don't know, maybe it's 800,000 source words. And yeah, $34 just because it does that. And to your point, Andreas, we always encourage doing this mostly for user interface jobs because you need context in user interface jobs and not just two strings out of nowhere because of polysemy. You never know what translators can end up translating if they have no context.
Yeah, and Jerome, I assume this is also one of the reasons why your team and yourself didn't want to stay in the lane of translation localization only, that you wanted to have some guidance and even some control on the creation of content. So in other words, you didn't want just to be in charge of translating and localizing the content, but you wanted also to have a word to say about how source content is created and maintained, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's another, yeah, I know, and Andreas mentioned, there is a debate about the role of language management, and I think language management per se goes way beyond translation localization, and I think many localization teams in client organizations or in LSPs would be happier in their job if they could have more control or more, I would say, more guidance around, the source content, which is actually what they have to work with. So if they take things, upstream more, I think, downstream is going to be better as well. So that's my logic in terms of language management. The sooner you get it right, the better it's going to get at the end. So it's really, that's why I think it's really valuable. It creates a lot of value to be cross-functional because at the end of the day, you save money, time, you save conflicts, etc., etc. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to illustrate your point about getting things as good as possible from the start. Well, you know the expression garbage in, garbage out, and it applies to our words so well. And recently, I've run a QA check on a UI project, and I discovered a huge number of inconsistencies and also devilish developers English, and simple words like database coming into 4 different ways of spelling database, uppercase, lowercase. It's all over the place. And I started asking engineering about, don't you even look at what you're doing in language? No. And I go, well, you have automated tools that check the syntax of what you're writing your code. It's part of your Git pipeline. Why don't you have a grammar spell check? And they go, oh, I don't know, does that exist? I Googled it for 3 minutes and found some open source tools. And now they're checking it. And whenever they're pushing the file back to Git, if there's a typo, they get an error message and fix their things. Because in most cases, translators know that if dataset is one word here and dataset there, it's the same thing, right? But what happens with camel case words everywhere in a product? It's sometimes we get so many questions out of it. So that's one way of approaching it and being, again, more cross-functional and be influential on the authoring of the content, whether it's documentation or user interface. It's the same thing.
Yep. Oh, it couldn't be more logical than that. So I think that's just common sense. It's even not, process management. It's just common sense for me. Next question from Roberto. Another one. So you said that there was no compromise on quality. Okay, I see. I anticipate your answer, but I will let you answer. How did you verify that the quality did not suffer? Could this be due to the fact that 92% of your content is reused?
Yes, we have in the TMs only what we trust in the TMs. By the way, we also built a TM checking tool using an LLM. So what it does is identify if there's the wrong language in the TM, can happen, or if something makes complete no sense. For instance, if a segment is 4 words in English and we have 25 in German, well, there's a problem here. So we do these sort of checks from time to time. That's one way of approaching it, and I think I just lost my train of thoughts. So no, it's about ensuring that what we get in the TM is correct, and how we ensure quality. Well, I have some German speakers in my team. I'm a French native speaker myself. I have a Japanese native speaker. So we also do these kind of checks from time to time, where we ask each other about, oh, hey, we're looking into this. There's a QA error. Can you look into this? And yeah, we usually, as PMs, we look at what we're sending to translation agencies. We don't just send blindly. We're no longer file pushers. So we look into each job before pushing them to translation, and ensuring that it doesn't look bad, or it's going to get back at us in any way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. One more question. We have more questions. So Jerome, question for you specifically this time. Can you share with us today, if it's not confidential, the rough volume of words that you are managing, that your team is managing per year?
Well, I wouldn't say it's confidential, really. Honestly, from the top of my head, I don't have the numbers for 24. I think we're getting around 10 million target words.
Target, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right.
More or less. Honestly, I don't know. I'm just saying based on past years. I haven't looked at the numbers.
Yeah, it's one of those production metrics that sometimes are just interesting or just curious to know, because yeah, it's very, as I said, it's very productivity oriented, but at the same time, it's a good indicator about the scope of work that a team is doing or not. So that's that's fine. More questions. So from Liz, how do you track local target language updates only, so that you do not override if the English source is updated?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think it means the question is, in your business, well, in your processes, how do you track the updates in the targets, in the target languages, to make sure that it's synchronized with the source in English?
Okay. Well, I think it's super simple, actually. Target is a deliverable, and English is the only reliable source. So we never, ever touch anything in the target if we don't have anything in the English too. So that's some of the things that engineers used to do in the past. They would update the French, the German, the Spanish, and the Japanese JSON files directly themselves. And sometimes there was disconnects with the source. So updates on targets never happen if we don't have an update on source first, and that's a mandate. And this is how a TMS works anyway. You don't change the target based on no changes in the source. This is how it works. It's not detected as a change anyway.
Okay.
Obviously, like we still make mistakes as humans, and like translators will make mistakes, etc. And the good thing about an online process is that you can then quite easily go back and correct it, right? In those off cases. So if something happens downstream, you notice it in Portuguese or Japanese, etc. Someone notices it, you can still go back and create and rectify it at the source in the TMS, and it won't get overwritten next time. Then you've improved the central repository that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's essential, because if you start tweaking things outside of XTM, then the TM doesn't get updated. And next iteration, when you update your file, boom, you get back your old translation. I've seen this happen too many times in the past, but hopefully no longer now.
Yeah, and I think, Jerome, that's the benefit of having a very centralized team like yours, Because I think
Yes.
in other organizations, when I was working in decentralized organizations, sometimes you have local teams touching the target language, so the content in French or in German, and actually, they change the content more than just correct it, actually. And because of that, the content which is changed in German or in French is no longer in sync with the English source, because of course they touched the target, they changed the deliverable, as you said. But I think for you, that's my guess. But I think for you, it's easier to make sure that this synchronization between the target and the source is going to be respected, because you have more control on the chain, if I can put it like that.
Yeah. And every time I'm engaging with new stakeholders internally, whether it's engineering or anyone else, I always mention that English source is their ownership. Even if we find errors in there, we could manually change everything we like in the source, but we never do it. We just return reports to the persons who take responsibility and do this. And we also say that ownership of translation is ours, and it's only ours. It's none of your files. It's our files, period. And that sets the expectations.
There is no more question in the chat, but I have one final question, because we are getting to the end of this session, unfortunately. So you mentioned, of course, in your product management timeline, when you were doing more with less, you mentioned the value that you created internally, which was, to manage more products with less budget, and significantly less budget. So that's what I would call internal value. But how did you measure the value for your customers? So not just internally in your team and what you could deliver as value within Precisely, but also the value for the customers buying your solutions or your services. So did you sort of, connect the value that was created on the client side with your value internally, or were you focused more on the internal value?
Well, I think the first value is indeed internal. If I would have to rate the two, I think it's internal because of everything we can do with such tools. And the value is easy to demonstrate because it makes everyone's lives easier, for sure. But obviously, there's a ripple effect with customers because they get their translated content faster. So it helps us too because we're reducing the time to market. Obviously, this is essential. For some products in the past, we used to spend a lot of time translating before the release until code freeze and QA and everything. And then we would start looking into documentation. And one of the products we support still now, I think we had a 6-month period after the release, and all languages were made available one by one in the next 6 months. And now everything is happening at the same time. So when we do a release, it's in most cases, not all the products, it's mostly international. So if English is released on day one, then on day one, you get up to 15, 16 languages at the same time. And I think that's a value for the customer because they get the language. Some of the products we sell are very end customer related, and these people need the latest version of the product, and they cannot live with a half-baked solution with English and French at the same time, for instance. It would be unbearable. Or they cannot wait 3 months before getting the new version with the new features. So that's what we're trying to reduce as much as we can. And we've been able to do this really very significantly. So that's the added value for the customers, I think.
So yeah, you are combining operational metrics, then operational value with customer experience value, actually.
Yes, it's customer experience. I think that illustrates it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's a very interesting point because of course value has to be for the business, but that has to be for the customers of the business as well. So it's sometimes difficult for some organizations to connect the internal operational value with the external customer value. But it's all about the experience. You just mentioned it. So I see that we are already nearly at the end of the session, not totally at the end, because I need to, give the floor back to Philip in a minute. But I would like to thank you, Jerome, and you, Andreas, for the time today, and also the time to prepare this session. So I appreciated the time we spent together to prepare this session for the audience. So I would like to thank the audience for attending, of course. And Philip, I'll give you the floor back for some final words.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Well, first of all, I would like to join you in thanking our speakers for these excellent presentations, which were really fascinating today. I think we could probably go on, and I see there are more questions coming in as we're talking. But yeah, we're coming to the end nevertheless. I just would like to also thank the participants and remind them that we're always keen to receive feedback. And the best way to provide us with your feedback is to use our Slido. So it's basically you type in slido.com, you put in the code here 3189564, and you will see that there are a few questions there. And we would be, of course, very keen to receive your appreciation about how good or how less good this particular ValueCast was, as usual. And many thanks in advance. And again, thank you to everybody else. And I think this is the end of our session today. I hope to see you again soon we have our summit. So I'd like to take this occasion as well to invite you to that as well. Thanks again to all. Thank you, Bruno, for moderating very expertly as usual.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.